We've all been there. You made something, you posted it, you were proud of it.
Stewart, have you seen this? What now, Barbara? These cutting boards, they're fantastic.
And then this happened.
We have to have one. Contact him, ask him to make you one.
Testes, testes, 1, 2. Are we good? Okay, in today's project, we are gonna make a cutting board, and I'm gonna go over some of the basics with you. Some basic tools that you will absolutely need to do this, which actually isn't all that much. And we're also gonna go over a couple little tricks and things that most of these videos don't teach you so that you can troubleshoot your way through this when you run into these problems. Now on to a few of the tools you're gonna need. One is a table saw. It doesn't matter what kind of table saw you have. It can be a simple job site table saw from Home Depot. That's fine, but you need to have something that can cut a straight edge with a fence. Item number 2. You will need some form of sander. Once again, it doesn't have to be a fancy sander, it just has to be a sander. Item 3, clamps. You can never have too many of these. Start buying them now. But at a minimum, maybe 2 clamps. 3 if you can swing it. And then a couple consumable items, not to eat, sandpaper, and finally, glue. The only game in town that's going to be on the market that you can readily find is going to be Type-On 3. And the reason we use Type-On 3 is that it is waterproof, and your cutting board is going to be exposed to water all the time. That all being said, there are a few extras that you can have that will help you complete this project a little easier, but these are the minimum tools necessary to do this. Step 1 is milling up your lumber. Now, if all you have is a table saw, that is fine. Just know that you will have to square up all 4 sides on the saw itself. Now, if you're someone who is just going to make like a single cutting board or a gift for someone for Christmas, what I'm gonna show you next is probably way overkill for you. But if you are someone who got the woodworking bug or who does this more professionally or as a extreme weekend warrior like myself, a couple of these things will probably help you out and make your process go a lot faster. Using a jointer and a planer are 2 other additional ways you can square up the wood for your glue ups. Now, what's important before you get cutting these things into strips is that you mill everything at the same time, because what you want is everything to be the same height, okay? Because that's gonna matter for your glue up. When you clamp these things down in these panels, you don't want these things to be uneven, okay? So mill it all at once, make it all the same thickness, and then you can head back to your table saw to start making some cuts. And as a side note, I like to cut my lengths into about 18 inches because when you do start cutting these things down and you start to turn them in the glue up, it'll actually shrink your board down, or it'll shrink your wood down.
Shrink, shrink, blinkety blink.
It's shrinking! It's shrinking!
Oh my God, it's so funny.
Anyway. Now, if you're doing this all on the table saw, this portion is actually repetitive. This is the step after I already milled the boards on the planer and the jointer. All right, now I've got 3 boards clamped up here, and there's a divide right here. But even with these fancy rockler clamps, which are made to keep everything, for the most part, perfectly level, board to board. From experience, I know that even when I take these out, there's going to be boards that are just slightly lower and boards that are just slightly higher. And that's really not avoidable, and it is a complication you'll have to deal with, and hence the sanding. All right, it's the next morning, day 2. Gonna take these things out of the clamps and get moving. And you know, I think I changed my mind about the absolute necessities for making a cutting board. A planer is probably absolutely necessary. If you're gonna make just one, you can probably get by without it. But if you're gonna turn out anything above one, it's gonna save you so much time and effort. It's well worth your money. And I think you can see what I'm talking about here. Having to sand these all by hand would have been absolutely miserable. Now I start by squaring off one end on the miter saw, which could also be accomplished using a miter gauge on your table saw. I cut my segments at 1.5 inches thick, which will end up being the final thickness of the cutting board itself. And next I set up a stop block so that I can make repeatable, reliable 1.5 inch cuts. For the next glue up, I like to flip every other board to make an interesting, repeatable pattern. And then we're back to the clamps for a second glue up. After about 30 minutes in the clamps, I come back with a scraper to scrape off the excess glue. And this is what I'm talking about. Some of these boards are not quite the same height as the other boards, and this is all going to have to be sanded off later. Now, using a miter gauge, I square off one side and then repeat the other side using the table saw fence. So now is that time in the build when you would normally spend, a long time sanding. You got to get rid of all these bad boys, all this glue that's stuck up there, all the unevenness in these little boards, however small they may be. And you would normally grab your sander and just, spend a ton of time sanding. And that's what I've been doing for a really long time. However, I made a little impulse buy. So instead of showing you hours of me sanding, I'm just going to show you this thing, which most of you probably don't have, and I realize that. Sorry. And that is this bad boy, which is going to save me so much time and effort. Let's get to it. So satisfying. And my back and arms are thanking me right now. So once that initial sanding is done, you bring it back over here, which is probably where you're going to be starting anyway. Now, if you got a dab bod and you got this little bit of pooch right here, this is where you're really going to shine, all right? Because as you're sanding, this thing's going to want to jump all over the place. So you take this little dad bod pooch, you plop it right on top of there. It's like a third hand. After you've sanded through all your grits, of which I typically start at 80, then go to 120, and then 150, you switch over to your router with a 1/4 inch round over bit to soften up those edges. And here I'm just marking some start and stop locations for the handle that I'm going to route into the cutting board. And I don't know what this particular router bit's called, but it has a little guide bushing to prevent you from digging too far into your cutting board while you're making your handles. And now for a little bit of branding magic. And for the finish, I'm using a mixture of mineral oil and beeswax, which I got from Jonathan Katz Moses. Now, if you haven't seen his channel, go check it out. It's way better than mine. Thanks for watching. Now, get out there and make something.